Hello, welcome to the live stream. Today I'm going to talk more on secret societies, intelligence agencies, and I decided and today especially, I've been meaning to do this for a while. I've been wanting to explain why I chose to learn Russian and the implications that learning Russian has on someone's life, their brain, potential jobs and careers, everything that comes along with learning the Russian language. And why choose Russian? Why not choose Spanish? Or why choose German? Or why not choose French, right? And I'm going to explain why I chose Russian. So, to start off, obviously, there's a lot of different foreign languages that you could choose from. You could choose from Spanish or German or French, or not to choose a foreign language at all. You could choose to just study math or science or become an astronaut or just become an accountant, study money, finance, right? Why choose a foreign language? Well, in my case, and there's many reasons why I chose a foreign language plus Russian, was because I came from already a background that spoke multiple languages, uh, and I was already already in tune with foreign languages. Uh, I was in school in Canada, and French. The French people were very snobby. They were very secretive. They were mean in school. And French teachers were not had a they did not have a reputation for being nice. At least not my French teachers at my school. Now, other French teachers may have been nice to you, but I have also spoken with other people from different schools across Canada, and a lot of people had the same consensus that French teachers were generally not nice and were kind of mean. And if you did not speak perfect French, so that was kind of discouraging for me to keep studying the French language. And I wanted a challenge, I wanted a different language. I ended up coming onto Russian because the other reason for Russian is Russia's the biggest country in the world. Like, if you look at the world map and you're trying to figure out which language you want to study, and you see how big Russia is, that has got to encourage you to study Russian, right? In a way. Then there's three potential career paths for someone who studies Russian language. There's the business career path with global business and global trade, doing business with Russia. There's also the cultural aspect. A lot of beautiful Russian women, they marry American men and Russian women, and learning Russian could be great for a family reason. And then the third reason, which is very prominent, is, the FBI and the CIA and the American military. I literally had called up the American military. I was from Canada and I was good with foreign languages, and this was in my early 20s, and I called the United States military and I said, if I wanted to get a job doing some kind of translation work in the United States military, what languages are in demand? What are like the top 3 languages that the United States military desperately wants people to study or wants people to know? And they said the top 3 languages that the United States military wants are Arabic, Chinese, Mandarin, Cantonese, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. Now, next to Arabic, Russian's pretty easy compared to Arabic. Arabic is extremely hard for a native English speaker to learn. Then Chinese, Chinese and Cantonese and Mandarin is also pretty hard. And visually, you would probably say that Chinese visually looks the hardest, right? If you were to just kind of get an intuition onto which language would be the hardest, you'd probably think Chinese, right? So Russian looks pretty easy next to those two. I chose Russian. I wanted a challenge, but I also wanted a potential job opportunity. And knowing that if I learned Russian, maybe I could get a job working for the United States military, or I could work for the American FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or I could work for the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. These were just that I didn't actually set out for a career in that field. I'm just saying that it's do you have options when you study Russian, because now it's not just the business side of Russian where you could potentially, do global business and you could work with Russian companies, and it's not just the cultural side of Russian where if you marry a Russian woman then you could speak Russian, right? It's also that the CIA, the FBI, the American military, they look for people who can speak Russian. So now there's another reason to learn Russian. But my real reason for learning Russian was not any of those three. I didn't marry a Russian woman. I don't do business with Russian companies, right? And I don't work for the CIA, and I don't work for the American military. I don't work for the American FBI. My real reason for learning Russian actually is I am a scientist and a mathematician and an astronomer. And when I was growing up, I watched a movie. It was the very first astronaut to ever go into outer space. The very first astronaut to go into space. So, of course, the first astronauts to land on the moon, apparently, allegedly, the first astronauts to ever land on the moon were American astronauts, right? One small step for man, one small step for mankind, right? The American astronauts were the first people to land on the moon. But the very first astronaut to ever go into space, like to just penetrate space, was a Russian astronaut named Yuri Gagarin. So that inspired me because it made me feel as though Russia was really big into space. And they were, at least 20, 30 years ago, they were extremely big on the space. They still kind of are, but other countries like Japan and China and the United States have begun to surpass Russia a bit. And as I started to do my Russian language studies and study Russian culture, I realized that although Russia used to be like the leader in space and science and technology, there was a little bit of a decline. So I can't just come out and say, oh, Russia is the absolute leader in science and technology and space. Sure, they're a big player, but the current leaderboard is actually looking more at Japan and America right now. But Russia's still a big player. So that's a reason. That's a big reason that I learned Russian. There were just so many job opportunities to learn Russian. There's so many opportunities in science and technology, in business, the government, the American military, the CIA for national defense. And like maybe I would meet a Russian woman and get married or something. So there's so many reasons. But French, right? The United States military is not concerned about France right now. So, like they are in a sense, obviously, the United States military has to be concerned about every country. Really, when you think about it, the United States military has to be concerned about Canada, Mexico, every country, not just Russia. But when I was growing up, it was told to me that there was a potential I could get, like there would be job opportunities if I learned Russian, right? So that's a big factor to learning Russian. But ultimately, I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to be an astronaut. And if the Americans wouldn't let me work for NASA, then the only other big space agency that I saw, this was 15 years ago, was Russia, right? Obviously, now everything's different now, right? I didn't know 15 years ago that now Japan and America would be the leaders in space. I didn't know that, right? But 15 years ago, Russia was a leader in space. So began learning Russian for that reason. But I don't think that learning Russian, I honestly, and now here's my honest opinion, although now I speak Russian, я говорю русский язык, я знаю русский язык хорошо, я хорошо знаю русский язык, even though I speak Russian now, would I do it over again? No. If I could get in a time machine and go back and stop myself from learning Russian, would I stop myself from learning Russian? Yes. Was it worth the time and effort? No. And this came from a Russian itself. A Russian told me when I was beginning my Russian language studies. Actually, it was a video. It was not told me. It was a video. It was a YouTube video. It was a Russian guy. And he says, Russian might not be worth the effort and energy to learn Russian. There's a lot of other languages that might be worth your time and effort. And, learning a foreign language is very difficult. So you need, you need to have, it needs to be worth your time and effort. And it wasn't worth my time and effort. But it could be different for other people. It could be different for you because just because my circumstances didn't work out doesn't mean that you can't learn Russian and then get a job at the FBI or work at the CIA or just work with a Russian oil big company, right? So it could still work out for you. You could still learn Russian and be very successful, but it didn't work out for me. And would I do it again? No, I wouldn't learn Russian. It didn't work out. And you're gonna have 9 people out of 10 telling you, "Oh yeah, I learned Russian. Go do it. It's so easy. You're gonna learn Russian in 3 months." That's not true. I mean, unless you're like an absolute genius when it comes to languages, but the average person will take longer than 3 months at least to learn Russian. 3 months maybe for Spanish or another language, but for Russian, if you're starting off as an English speaker, oh, it's safe to say that it's going to take you longer than 3 months to learn Russian. Especially if you want to speak Russian like a fluent, like a native Russian. Oh no, no, unless you're like the absolute genius, prodigy of languages. I do not ever foresee any English person learning Russian and speaking like a fluent native Russian within 3 months, right? I don't see that happening. So Russian is a difficult language. And that's why I don't discourage people from learning Russian, but I caution you. I severely caution you. Because the other thing that happened to me, which I'm going to explain now, and it's part of someone who learns languages in general, is your English, at least this is how it happened for me. Maybe it might be different for you, but in my case, my English started to suffer a little bit at first. When you are learning a foreign language, you're learning different syntax, morphology, you're learning different word order, and it kind of messes with your brain a bit because you're used to speaking English and you're speaking English in a certain way, and then now you're being taught to completely change the way you speak, the syntax, where you put the words, the emphasis. It can be confusing. And it's very difficult when you're learning a new foreign language. It actually affects your native language a bit. And there would be times when like I would be in public and I'm supposed to speak English and I suddenly start speaking Russian because I was studying Russian, right? So you could see where there could be sometimes there could be some issues there. But then something miraculous happened. Something amazing happened. Suddenly, after I got through the learning curve, because there's a learning curve with everything, and there's a learning curve with learning Russian. And after I reached the plateau in my Russian, suddenly my English improved. And here's why my English improved. And now I think that my English is beyond native level. Like if there's a level higher than native level fluency of English, I feel like it's even higher. And this is why my English improved. Because when you study Russian, you appreciate the English language. Anyone who was in English class who didn't like English or appreciate the English language, who didn't appreciate their own native language, you go to study Russian and then you suddenly go through all of these learning hurdles. You see how complicated the Russian case system is. You will then go back to English and be like, "Oh, English, I love you, English. You are my native language. I so love you. Why did I ever think that English was hard?" Like, English looks so easy. Your native language of English looks like a piece of cake once you study Russian, right? In relative terms. So now, when you go to speak English, you speak with this confidence, like this happiness. I'm speaking my native language. I grueled over the Russian language. I learned the case system, and I still don't even feel confident when I speak Russian. But now when I speak English, I am so appreciative of my native language. Like this, I know this language, and you have this special confidence that, and you really does. You really improve your English speaking ability. Because I'll give you an example of where I saw my English level improved. I could read books faster in English. Typically, it usually took me about 2 weeks to finish a novel. And then I started reading novels within 3, 4 days in English. After you study Russian, and if you attempt to study Chinese, then when you go back to read an English novel, you realize how easy English is because it's your native language. And now you used to think, oh, reading an English book was so hard. Oh, it's going to take me weeks to finish this novel. Then when you go after studying Russian and you go to read an English novel, you're like, I'm so happy to be back in my native language. And you go through that English book. You go through that English novel within days and you're just so happy and excited. And that's what happened to me. I it improved my English reading ability to be able to read faster in English. It really did. Especially when you're learning Russian and you're trying to listen to a Russian conversation, your brain has to speed up because Russians talk faster. It's just natural, their language, they talk faster. That's actually true for Russians. They just talk faster. Um, And if you actually compared, like if you took a Russian person who spoke within 2 minutes, and then you took an English person who spoke within 2 minutes, each person spoke within 2 minutes, I would bet you that there was probably like, you know, 1,000 words, for example, said with the Russian person, and maybe 500 words for the English person, because Russians talk faster and they talk more. It's just their culture. It's the way they are. I'll give you an example, okay? Um, this is how I'm just gonna give you an example how Russians are very talkative people. They talk faster. In Russian culture, if you say hello, how are you? Russian culture, they will tell you everything that happened that day. They will tell you details. But in English culture, in American and Canadian culture, hello, how are you is just like a formal greeting. It's just like an introduction to be polite. But you're not actually asking people how they really feel, how their day went. But in Russian culture, if you ask a Russian person, hello, how are you? The Russian person's going to tell you exactly, not exactly, but they're going to give you an idea of how they're feeling, how their day went. They're going to go into detail, right? Rather in American and Canadian culture, if you ask someone, hello, how are you? We just mean it as a formal greeting to be polite. We're actually not expecting someone to just turn around and say, oh, I had a horrible day. I got, lost at the bus station and then I couldn't find my luggage at the airport and then blah, 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 right? So Russians typically talk faster. If you study Russian, then when you go back to do your English, you will like your English will improve. You're going to appreciate English. You're going to appreciate your native language. You're going to get more creative in English because English is going to seem easier now. I write creative novels in English. I have more ideas in English. And I really actually, the other thing, that positive thing that comes from speaking Russian, really positive, that speaking Russian, is you have an appreciation for different points of view. Okay. So when you watch Hollywood movies, this is not me. I don't portray Russians as evil stereotypes. I don't do that at all. Okay. And you have to realize that it's the entertainment value. It's entertainment. Okay. And it was the same for the Germans. Unfortunately, after World War II, there were all of these Nazi German movies, right? And I like to say sometimes, like, imagine if you're planning a trip to Germany, and right before you go to Germany, you have a movie marathon, and you watch like 10 Nazi German movies, Nazi Germany movies. Like you have a Hollywood movie, Nazi German movie marathon, right? You watch like 10 Hollywood German World War II Nazi movies right before your trip to Germany. So even though you know that it's Hollywood movies, it's fiction, the war was a long time ago, this was like in the 1950s, right? The war, it still kind of affects your subconscious. It still kind of maybe affects you a little bit, if you're, especially if you're just not then going to go to Germany the next day, right? It would be a really funny post. It'd be like, oh, I'm going to Germany for the first time, and I'm going to Germany tomorrow. And right before I went to Germany, I just watched 10 World War II Nazi Germany movies. It would affect you. It would definitely affect you. And, in American culture, they love to have a villain. Americans love to say, these are the good guys and these are the bad guys, right? But typically, the world doesn't always work out like that. Sure, there are definitely cases where that person is clearly bad. That person is a sociopath, a psycho person. That person is clearly bad. But a lot of times, unfortunately, people are just not bad. They're just different. They just do things differently. They're just different. Although you could think that they are bad, or you could just recognize the fact that maybe that's just the way they do things in their country, right? So I'll give you an example. Another example. Um, I was actually one of my Russian teachers on YouTube, who's a great Russian teacher. I won't name her because I don't want to, but I guess in Russian culture, if you talk to someone and you say, "Are you slow?" Right? Are you slow? What are you? Are you slow? Right? It's normal in Russian culture. It's like it's just a normal part of everyday speech in Russian. But in English culture, in American culture, and Canadian culture, it actually is kind of abrasive because, especially, you will never want to say to someone, "Or you, what are you, you know what I'm supposed to say, retweeted, right?" I'm not gonna say the other word, but the other word that sounds like retweeted. What are you retweeted? Are you retweeted, right? That word has become very offensive in American and Canadian culture, especially since there are a lot of people who are retweeted. You know what I mean? So it actually suddenly became used as an insult, really. So one time I was watching this Russian teacher and she was speaking English and she said it so like openly, like she said, this is what she said. This is what she said. She said, "What are you, retarded?" And she just like said it loudly. And I realized how abrasive it sounds when someone says it out loud. Or what are you, retarded? But obviously she's a Russian teacher. She doesn't know how like how much weight the words carry in other languages, right? She doesn't know that "are you retarded" has become very like kind of abrasive in English and American Canadian culture. But in Russian culture, it's normal, right? If you're not picking up on something fast enough, or if you're not studying something the right way, a Russian person might say to you like, "What are you, retarded?" Like it just might say it as a normal. They don't mean it to be offensive, right? They just mean it to be like, "What's wrong? Why aren't you?" So that's why you have to be very careful with your word choice. You really do. And when you study a foreign language, you appreciate um, you appreciate English. You definitely appreciate English. You appreciate the fact that you're comfortable, you speak your native language, and you're very cognizant, you're very aware. You suddenly become very aware of words. Words carry more significant meaning now when you study a foreign language. Okay? Because there's so much contextual background with words, right? In Russian, there's certain words in Russian that can start a war, like a war, like can start a fight. Like if there's certain words that if you say those words in Russian at a Russian bar, the whole bar will get into a fight, right? And there are also English words that if you say those words at a bar, those could get into a fight, right? Like I'll give you an example. Unfortunately, this is just the way it is in Canada. Canada did a lot of anti-American propaganda. That's just what Canada did, okay? After 9/11, Canada did a lot of documentaries accusing 9/11 of being an inside job. And now a lot of people believe that 9/11 was an inside job. But if you went to New York where 9/11 happened and you're Canadian and you went to a bar in New York City and you're Canadian and you happen to bring up a documentary about how there's Canadians who believe 9/11 was an inside job, what do you think is going to happen at that bar in New York where 9/11 actually happened? Right? Or even Texas. I mean, although Texas is like at the other end of the country, if you go to America and you share the opinion that maybe, just maybe, according to all these Canadian documentaries, it's possible that 9/11 was an inside job, that this could start a major fight in the United States. So you have to be very careful with your words, certain things that you say, And vice versa in Russia, there are certain phrases that are extremely offensive in Russian. And what I was taught, what my Russian teachers told me, was the most offensive thing that you can say in Russian is insult someone's mother, which is via mat, when you just translate it verbatim, it's not offensive. It just means your mother. But when you say it as a colloquial way, in a colloquial way, right? Obviously, if you're just saying, "Oh, your mother is going to the store, your mother is whatever, your mother is got a new job," obviously it's not offensive. But if you say it in a derogatory way, your mother, then that apparently is like one of the most offensive things you can say in Russia, is like offending someone's mother, which will cause a major fight. Now, uh, America though, like obviously you shouldn't offend people's mothers in America either. But if you notice, your mother has not become as offensive because it's offensive, sure, but they made all these your mama jokes, right? Like for years, when we were growing up, everyone in American culture and Canadian culture, they had all these your mama so this, your mama jokes that you right. And obviously these your mama jokes, they're like they kind of brought down the level of, obviously, you know what I mean? You know what I mean, right? So because of the yo mama jokes and everything like that, it's not as like a serious, right? But in Russian culture, they probably didn't have the yo mama jokes in Russian culture. So if you diss someone's Russian mama in Russia, they don't be like, "Oh, it's just a yo mama joke." They don't act like that in Russia. They will bring out the big guns, right? Like they will, in a manner of speaking. So I hope I explained the cons and pros of learning Russian. This is neither to discourage you or encourage you to learn Russian. It's simply to tell you the truth. It's simply to tell you these are the kinds of things that you'll experience if you decide to learn Russian. These are the benefits, these are the cons. This is just reality. This is obviously it's perception. Everyone has their own experiences with learning Russian, but generally speaking, these are the kind of things that people do often come across, the challenges when they learn Russian. And I hope that you just make an informed decision and you decide for yourself whatever language you want to learn, or if you don't want to learn a foreign language and you want to study something else, just make sure you research it, make sure you make a good decision for what's best for you, because there's different things that are better for different people, so you do what's best for you. And thank you for listening to the live stream. And I hope you like the live stream. All right, that's it. Это все на сегодня. До свидания. Спасибо за внимание. Yes, and до свидания. Добрый день. Yeah, всего доброго.